Judge Malcolm Bronson was a well-respected figure in Richmond, Virginia, where he presided over the Richmond Circuit Court for over 22 years. Known for his strict adherence to the law, Bronson developed a public persona as a disciplinarian who imposed maximum sentences for minor offenses, particularly traffic violations. His firm stance on law enforcement earned him the respect of fellow judges and law enforcement officers within Virginia's 13th Judicial Circuit, which covers the Richmond area. At 52 years old, Bronson lived in an affluent neighborhood in Richmond's West End with his wife, Margaret, a local real estate agent. The couple appeared to lead an exemplary life, further cementing his image as a respected figure both in the legal community and among local citizens. His demeanor in court was stern and formal, and his colleagues viewed him as someone who took his duties very seriously, following legal procedures with rigid discipline. However, beneath this well-crafted public image, there were signs that his private life and behavior were not as spotless as they appeared. There were whispers among court employees who had witnessed troubling behaviors, especially concerning his interactions with female defendants. Despite his respected position, these behaviors contradicted the persona of fairness and professionalism that he projected in public. This duality in his character would later play a significant role in the investigation into his criminal activities, which were eventually uncovered. Sarah Martinez, who worked as a court clerk from 2015 to 2020, would later provide testimony that revealed concerning details about Judge Malcolm Bronson's behavior during his time on the bench. According to Martinez, Bronson often engaged in private, one-on-one conversations with female defendants in his chambers, an action that was in violation of standard court protocols. Such private interactions were not only inappropriate but also posed a serious conflict of interest, as they were outside the formal courtroom procedures and likely influenced by personal motives rather than judicial duty. This pattern of behavior raised red flags among some court employees, although it had not initially drawn much attention. At the time, Bronson's strict adherence to the law and his commanding presence in the courtroom kept his professional reputation intact. However, Sarah Martinez's testimony would later serve as a crucial element in exposing Bronson's illicit actions. In addition to these private conversations, further investigation into Bronson's financial dealings revealed troubling information. Financial records would later show that Bronson had accepted gifts and favorable loans from local business owners whose cases he had overseen in court. These financial transactions, although hidden at the time, indicated a serious breach of ethical conduct, further tarnishing his public image and pointing to his abuse of power for personal gain. These revelations were part of the foundation that would eventually unravel the judge's criminal activities. On February 3, 2020, Richmond Police Officer James Thompson pulled over an 18-year-old woman, Zuri Wallace, for a broken taillight on East Broad Street. Zuri Wallace, a senior at Armstrong High School, was unable to produce a valid driver's license during the traffic stop. She lived in a modest apartment with her mother, Sharon Wallace, after a parent separation, which had occurred 6 months earlier. Following the separation, Zuri's father, Rashad Wallace, had moved to a smaller residence, leaving the family in a precarious financial situation. Zuri's case was scheduled to appear on Judge Bronson's docket on February 17, 2020. In the courtroom, Zuri arrived alone, and security camera footage later revealed that Judge Bronson took a particular interest in her during the proceedings. After imposing a $500 fine and mandating a driver's education course, Bronson requested that Zuri stay behind after the session to discuss her payment arrangements. What followed was documented by courthouse security cameras and later by phone records. At 10:45 a.m. that day, Zuri and Bronson entered his chambers. They would remain inside for 47 minutes, with Zuri emerging visibly distressed. Over the next month, it became apparent that Bronson's interest in Zuri was far from professional. From February 17 to March 28, 2020, Bronson made contact with Zuri 31 times, using a prepaid mobile phone purchased at a local convenience store. Their meetings typically took place at the Hampton Inn on West Broad Street, where Bronson rented a room under the alias Michael Brooks. Hotel records later revealed that between February 20th and March 25th, Bronson met with Zuri 6 times. Surveillance footage in the hotel showed Bronson entering the building through a side entrance, dressed casually in a baseball cap and clothing that was much more relaxed than his usual courtroom attire. Zuri would arrive shortly after him, often looking hesitant and frequently glancing over her shoulder as she entered the hotel. During this time, Bronson's behavior in the courthouse began to change. He became noticeably agitated, especially when dealing with young female defendants. Reports from court employees indicated that he started taking extended lunch breaks and frequently altered his schedule, citing personal appointments that were never recorded on his official calendar. These changes in his routine seemed to coincide with his secret meetings with Zuri, marking a shift in his professional demeanor as he became increasingly consumed by his illicit affair with her on March 28, 2020. Just days before the scandal would explode, a troubling discovery was made. After weeks of increasing suspicion surrounding Judge Bronson's interactions with Zuri Wallace, an anonymous tip led to the collection of surveillance footage from the Hampton Inn, where the two had been meeting regularly. This footage, coupled with phone records showing numerous calls and text messages between Bronson and Zuri, painted a disturbing picture of their illicit relationship. The final straw came when Zuri's mother, Sharon Wallace, grew concerned about her daughter's behavior and began to notice signs that something was wrong. Zuri had been acting increasingly withdrawn, spending long periods on her phone and sneaking away from home under questionable pretenses. Sharon reached out to Zuri's school counselor, who, after speaking with Zuri, uncovered that she had been meeting with Judge Bronson and that their relationship had taken a sexual turn. The counselor immediately alerted the authorities, triggering an investigation into the situation. The investigation quickly revealed that Bronson had not only used his position as a judge to manipulate and exploit Zuri, but he had also been using the court system to cover up his tracks. For instance, Zuri's traffic violation case, initially an innocent encounter, had been handled in a manner that was far from ordinary. Not only had Bronson handled the case with unusual leniency, but he had also gone out of his way to ensure that Zuri's legal obligations were minimized, further suggesting that he was attempting to exert control over her. As the investigation into Bronson deepened, law enforcement discovered that Bronson had been using his role to prey on vulnerable young women, offering leniency and preferential treatment in exchange for sexual favors. Zuri, being one of the more recent victims, had become the focal point of this extensive probe. It was soon revealed that Bronson had been manipulating the court's docket to make time for his secret meetings with Zuri. By delaying or rescheduling other cases, he could ensure that he would have time to meet her at the hotel or in his chambers without raising suspicion. His consistent behavior, combined with the growing pattern of inappropriate interactions with Zuri, left authorities with no choice but to take action. On April 2nd, 2020, a warrant for Judge Bronson's arrest was issued. He was charged with multiple counts of sexual exploitation, abuse of power, and corruption. His arrest shocked the community, especially the judicial system, where he had once held considerable authority. The investigation into Bronson's actions led to further scrutiny of his career, uncovering a long history of unethical behavior, which was believed to be only the tip of the iceberg. Zuri, meanwhile, had been taken into protective custody, and her mother, Sharon, vowed to ensure that she received the necessary support to recover from the trauma caused by Bronson's manipulation and abuse. Despite the psychological toll of the situation, Zuri eventually found the courage to testify against Bronson, playing a crucial role in his conviction. Following the shocking arrest of Judge Bronson, the investigation into his illicit activities continued to unfold with even more disturbing revelations. As the authorities worked to piece together the full scope of his abuse of power, they began to identify additional victims who had also been manipulated or exploited by the judge. One of the most chilling aspects of Bronson's pattern of behavior was the way he used his position within the judicial system to target vulnerable individuals, particularly young women who came before his court for minor offenses. These young women often found themselves in situations where they believed they were being treated with unusual leniency, only to realize later that Bronson was exploiting their trust for his own sexual gratification. It was revealed that Bronson had a long history of targeting these women, started with his earlier years on the bench. The investigation uncovered a series of confidential records, including testimony from former colleagues and legal assistants, that suggested Bronson had been using his influence for years to manipulate legal proceedings in exchange for sexual favors. However, his misconduct had been carefully concealed, with many victims too afraid or ashamed to come forward, fearing retaliation or the loss of their cases. Additionally, a deeper dive into Bronson's personal life uncovered a pattern of deceit and manipulation within his relationships. He had maintained a facade of being a well-respected, upstanding judge while secretly engaging in numerous extramarital affairs and using his power to coerce women into sexual relationships. His family and colleagues had remained largely unaware of his activities, and many were shocked by the revelations that emerged during the investigation. Bronson's wife, who had been married to him for over 2 decades, was left devastated by the truth. She later became a key witness during his trial, testifying about the facade Bronson had built and the manipulation he had used in their personal lives. The investigation also found that Bronson had been engaged in an affair with Zuri Wallace's mother, Sharon, although the details of this relationship remain largely unclear. This connection, along with his interactions with Zuri, painted an even darker picture of his manipulation and exploitation. It seemed that Judge Bronson's ability to control those around him was not limited to Courtroom. He had infiltrated the lives of the families he interacted with, using his authority and charm to create a web of lies and deceit that spanned years. As the investigation progressed, authorities found that the victims had been too fearful to speak out due to Bronson's reputation and the power he wielded within the local legal system. Many of them had been led to believe that challenging Bronson's authority would lead to severe legal consequences. His ability to destroy lives, not only through his illicit actions but through his control of the legal system, made him an even more dangerous figure. Despite the immense challenges, a growing number of survivors came forward to testify against Bronson. This collective bravery began to break down the walls of silence that had kept his crimes hidden for so long. Eventually, the full extent of Bronson's manipulation and abuse was laid bare, resulting in his eventual conviction and sentencing. His case highlighted the dangerous intersection of power and corruption, shedding light on the vulnerabilities that exist within systems that are meant to uphold justice. Zuri Wallace's decision to testify against Bronson played a pivotal role in exposing his crimes. Her courage in the face of such overwhelming trauma helped pave the way for other victims to come forward, and her testimony was instrumental in securing a conviction. In the aftermath of Bronson's arrest, many of the survivors began to receive psychological counseling and support, though the emotional scars of their experiences would take years to heal. The case became a powerful reminder of the need for vigilance within the justice system and the importance of protecting those who are most vulnerable from those who are meant to serve and protect them. The investigation into Judge Bronson's actions took an even more dramatic turn when it was revealed that he had orchestrated a series of manipulative and abusive relationships, both within and outside of the legal system. The shocking details that emerged painted a picture of a man who had not only abused his position of power for personal gain, but had also used his influence to control and intimidate others for years. This chapter of the case shed light on the darker side of Bronson's behavior, revealing the full scope of his corrupt and predatory actions. One of the key revelations was the discovery of a hidden pattern of coercion, where Bronson had used his authority to silence potential victims and witnesses who might have exposed him. He had a network of people, both within the legal system and in his personal life, who were either complicit in his actions or too fearful to come forward. This web of silence had allowed Bronson to continue his exploitation with little fear of reprisal. His victims were often subjected to psychological manipulation, making them believe that resisting his advances would result in severe legal consequences. For many, the pressure of the psychological abuse was too much to bear, and they remained silent for years. Another startling aspect of the investigation was the role that Bronson's family played in shielding him from suspicion. It became clear that his wife, though unaware of the full extent of his crimes, had unknowingly protected him in ways that allowed him to maintain his position of power within the judicial system. For years, she had been convinced that her husband was a respected and honorable man, unaware of the double life he was leading. However, as the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that Bronson had been involved in multiple affairs, including one with Sharon Wallace, Zuri Wallace's mother. This affair, which had been kept under wraps for years, was key to understanding the extent of Bronson's manipulation and abuse. Sharon Wallace's role in the case became even more complex as the investigation showed that she had been involved in a secret relationship with the judge, which led to even more questions about the true nature of their interactions. The full extent of Bronson's manipulation was uncovered through interviews with former colleagues and legal assistants who had witnessed firsthand how he used his position to exploit vulnerable women. These individuals describe how Bronson had preyed on those who came before him in court, offering leniency or favorable rulings in exchange for sexual favors. Many of these women had been victims of minor offenses, but were ultimately drawn into Bronson's web of coercion, where they believed they had no choice but to comply with his demands. Bronson had carefully cultivated an image of being a compassionate and understanding judge, making it easy for him to gain the trust of his victims before exploiting it for his own gain. As the case developed, it became evident that Judge Bronson had been operating with a sense of entitlement, convinced that his power and influence would protect him from any legal consequences. He had a carefully curated public persona that he used to his advantage, gaining the trust of those who interacted with him. This persona allowed him to continue his predatory behavior without raising suspicion, and it wasn't until multiple survivors came forward that the full extent of his crimes began to surface. One of the most heart-wrenching aspects of the investigation was the testimony of the survivors who had been victimized by Bronson. These women, many of whom had suffered in silence for years, bravely shared their stories in an effort to bring justice to the judge's many victims. Their accounts painted a chilling portrait of Bronson's manipulative tactics, his ability to prey on vulnerable individuals, and the lasting emotional and psychological damage he had inflicted on them. In addition to the personal accounts of survivors, the investigation also revealed the systemic issues within the judicial system that had allowed Bronson's abuse to go unchecked for so long. It was clear that there had been multiple red flags and warning signs, but due to his position of authority, many people had either failed to see or chose to ignore these signs. The case prompted a deeper examination of how cases of judicial misconduct are handled and called for reforms to ensure that such abuses of power would be more easily detected and prevented in the future. The culmination of this chapter in the case was a public reckoning, as the judicial system and society at large were forced to confront the reality of how power and authority could be so easily manipulated. Judge Bronson's conviction marked the end of his career, but also marked the beginning of a broader conversation about the need for greater accountability and transparency within the legal system. His case became a pivotal moment in the fight for justice, shining a light on the dark side of power and the importance of protecting those who are most vulnerable. As the investigation into Judge Bronson's misconduct continued to unfold, another significant aspect of the case emerged: the uncovering of a series of illegal financial transactions linked to the judge's actions. These financial dealings, which were initially believed to be unrelated to the case, quickly became a key component in the investigation. It was revealed that Judge Bronson had used his position of power to influence financial decisions, engage in money laundering, and secure bribes that further supported his corrupt behavior. The illegal transactions began to surface when forensic accountants were brought in to examine the judge's personal and professional financial records. They uncovered a pattern of unusual transactions, which seemed to coincide with the timing of certain legal rulings made by Bronson. The most notable discovery was that Bronson had accepted large sums of money from individuals seeking favorable outcomes in court cases. These payments were cleverly disguised as donations to supposed charities or legal consultations, making them difficult to trace initially. Through a meticulous investigation, it became clear that Bronson had used his access to confidential legal information to manipulate cases involving financial disputes, real estate, and corporate interests. In exchange for these favorable rulings, he had been bribed with substantial amounts of money. Some of the people who had paid these bribes were high-profile business figures and criminal enterprises, while others were everyday citizens who had been pressured into paying for justice. The investigators also found evidence of money laundering schemes that had been set up to conceal the origins of the funds. Bronson had been funneling the bribes through a series of shell companies, bank accounts, and offshore accounts, effectively hiding the money trail and avoiding detection. His connections with shady financial advisors and criminal associates had helped to maintain the illusion of financial legitimacy while continuing his illegal activities. As the financial aspects of the case were brought to light, they began to reveal a broader pattern of corruption within the judicial system. Many of Bronson's colleagues were implicated in these financial dealings, suggesting that the judge was not acting alone. It appeared that a network of individuals within the court system had been involved in these illicit activities, enabling Bronson to maintain his power and influence for years. Some of these individuals were low-level court employees, while others held significant positions within the legal system. Their involvement in the money laundering operations and bribery schemes raised serious questions about the integrity of the judicial system as a whole. The impact of these revelations was far-reaching. Not only did it expose Bronson's personal corruption, but it also raised doubts about the fairness and transparency of the court system in the jurisdiction where he had served. The public was outraged as more details emerged, and the demand for accountability grew louder. People began to question how many other judges and legal professionals might be engaging in similar practices, and what could be done to prevent such widespread abuse of power in the future. In response to these findings, a special commission was set up to investigate the extent of the corruption within the judicial system. The commission's goal was to identify any other judges or officials involved in these illicit financial activities and to implement stronger safeguards against such misconduct. In addition, public calls for legal reforms became more urgent, with many demanding that greater oversight and transparency be established within the judiciary to prevent further cases of corruption. Judge Bronson's actions also led to a reevaluation of how legal and financial investigations are conducted. The discovery of his money laundering schemes showed the importance of conducting thorough and sophisticated financial audits as part of corruption investigations. It also highlighted the need for more resources and specialized personnel to investigate complex financial crimes within the public sector. As the case progressed, the financial ramifications of Bronson's actions were not only felt in the legal system, but also in the communities affected by his rulings. Many individuals who had been subject to his biased decisions were now seeking legal redress. Lawsuits were filed against the judge, some from people who had been unjustly penalized in their cases, while others were from business owners who had been forced to pay bribes to secure favorable rulings in commercial disputes. The case also had a lasting impact on public trust in the judicial system. Many people, especially those who had previously placed their faith in the integrity of the courts, were left disillusioned and angry. The revelations about Judge Bronson's financial dealings were a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for corruption to seep into even the most trusted institutions. In the aftermath, while the focus remained on Bronson's financial crimes, the case had a ripple effect on the judicial system as a whole. Reforms began to take shape, including the establishment of more stringent financial disclosure requirements for judges, greater scrutiny of judicial conduct, and the implementation of stronger anti-corruption measures. The goal was to ensure that no one, regardless of their position, could exploit the system for personal gain. Judge Bronson's conviction for his financial crimes added another layer of accountability to his legacy, but also served as a reminder of the need for continued vigilance and reform in the legal system to prevent similar abuses in the future. In the final phase of the case, Judge Bronson was convicted and sentenced for his crimes, including bribery, money laundering, and judicial misconduct. The trial revealed the extent of his corrupt activities, leading to public outrage and demands for systemic reform in the judicial system. Bronson's conviction served as a catalyst for widespread scrutiny and legal reforms, aiming to prevent future corruption in the courts and restore public trust in the justice system. His case highlighted the need for greater transparency and oversight in the legal profession. The investigation into Judge Bronson's crimes led to the discovery of overwhelming evidence, including surveillance footage, phone records, and DNA matches. This evidence, along with testimony from key witnesses, resulted in his eventual arrest and conviction. His actions not only destroyed the lives of his victims, but also shattered public trust in the judicial system, prompting calls for reform to prevent future abuses of power by those in positions of authority. Judge Bronson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of Zuri and Malik Wallace, as well as 20 years for statutory rape. In a powerful moment, Zuri's mother, Sharon Wallace, addressed him directly in court, expressing the deep betrayal and loss caused by his actions. Bronson's conviction marked the end of a long legal battle and served as a grim reminder of the dangers of power and corruption in the judicial system.